If you're playing RuneScape Dragonwilds by just spamming your attacks until something dies, you're making combat way harder than it needs to be. There's a few mechanics in this game that completely change the way you should be fighting, and you can massively improve your stamina regeneration just by changing one piece of armor. You can get half of your maximum stamina back using one mechanic, and you can use different combat styles together to make fights much easier. And there's a ton of spells, buffs, and weapon abilities that I see people completely ignoring. So in this video, I'm going to go through 10 combat tips that I genuinely think will help make you a much better Dragonwilds player. Some of these are things I wish I knew when I first started playing, and some of them have become absolutely essential now that we're getting into the later regions and the harder content. So let's get into it. We're going to start with what is probably one of the best combat tips in the game. We're talking about wearing one piece of magic armor, even if you're a melee player, even if you've never touched magic, and even if you're wearing completely different armor for the rest of your gear. The reason is, with just one piece of magic armor equipped, you get a 50% reduction to your stamina regeneration delay, and that is massive because stamina is basically the resource that controls your entire combat loop. You need it to attack, you need it to dodge, you need it to block, and obviously if you run out of stamina at the wrong time, you're going to have a really bad day. So if you're playing melee, for example, I personally recommend running 2 pieces of melee armor with 1 piece of magic armor. You still get the melee bonuses, including the increased crit chance after blocking. Then your third piece gives you that 50% reduction to the stamina regeneration delay. So you're getting the best benefits from both sets. And this isn't some weird min-maxing strategy that only works on paper. You can genuinely feel the difference. And if you're playing magic, I'd go with the full 3-piece set, the same with range as well. But definitely if you're wearing melee, go with 2 melee, 1 magic. That's the combination that I use. It's one of the best things about Dragonwilds, that you're not punished massively for mixing the sets up. And also, if you don't like the way that the magic headgear looks, you can toggle this off in the settings. And you can also put a staff in your hands while wearing melee armor and still be extremely effective. Obviously, you're going to get more out of a dedicated 3-piece set if you're specializing in that combat style, but you don't have to. And that brings me on to the next tip. Tip number 2 is to use all 3 combat styles. Now, I know this seems obvious, but I do see a lot of people locking themselves out and just sticking to one build. So don't think of yourself as a melee player, range player, magic player. You've got 3 combat styles, so please use them. This is one of the things that I really like about Dragonwilds combat. You don't need to commit to one style for the entire game. Personally, I really like opening a fight with a longbow. If the enemy hasn't noticed you yet, you do get a damage bonus for that as well, so you can get a big opening hit in before they even start fighting back. Then once they get close, switch over to melee and finish them off. Also, if I'm dealing with a group, magic can be incredibly useful. For example, you can knock enemies down or stagger them, especially with the wind spells. This again can give you an opportunity to switch to your melee weapon and absolutely destroy them while they're on the floor. Also, before you even initiate the fight, you can use a secondary attack with water to create the healing aura, which again is going to be super useful. So my advice for this tip is, don't just think I'm a melee player, therefore I only use melee. Think, what is going to make this fight the easiest? Sometimes that's your sword, sometimes it's your bow, sometimes it's a staff, and sometimes it's all 3 during the same fight. The best part is that you don't necessarily need to change your armor every time you change your weapon. Use the tools you've got. Moving on to tip number 3, it's the parry. This is probably the single biggest combat mechanic that I think players should learn. If you've never really bothered with the shield before, start learning it, because a successful parry doesn't just prevent you from taking damage, it gives you a massive reward. A successful parry gives you 50% of your maximum stamina back. Not 50% of whatever stamina you currently have, 50% of your maximum stamina. So let's say you've burned almost your entire stamina bar attacking, you go and successfully parry the next attack, suddenly you've got half of your maximum stamina back, and that means you can immediately go back on the offensive. But that's not the only reward. A successful parry also gives you the opportunity to perform a visceral attack. This is the game's big cinematic punish. So your combat loop can become attack, use up your stamina, enemy attacks, parry, get that stamina back, visceral attack, and then continue attacking and doing more damage. That is so much more effective than just standing there spamming your attack button and hoping you kill the enemy before it kills you. And this game is very clearly trying to encourage you to play this way. The shield progression gets increasingly interesting. Some of the higher tier shields have effects that specifically interact with successful parries. So the better you get at parrying, the more valuable those shields become. This is something I would genuinely recommend practicing on normal enemies. So find some goblins, find some Garou, green dragons, learn their attack animations and get used to the timing, because once you start recognizing the attacks rather than simply reacting to them, parrying becomes so much more easier. And of course, there's another really important part to this. Not every attack can be parried. If an enemy gives you the visual indicator of one of those powerful attacks that can't be parried, don't try to be a hero, dodge it. Which leads us perfectly into the next tip. Tip number 4 is don't greed your attacks. This again sounds obvious, but I guarantee you've done it. I know I have. You've got an enemy almost down to no health. You've started your attack combo. You know the next hit is going to kill it, and then the the enemy starts attacking, and instead of backing away, you think, nah, I've got this, and then you die. Don't do that. You don't have to finish your combo. This is especially prevalent with magic. Magic attacks have these 4-piece combos where the later attacks are often the really powerful ones. And yes, they are powerful, but that doesn't mean that you should stand there and take a hit just to get them off. If you're about to get hit, do whatever you need to do. You can always attack again, and the enemy isn't going anywhere. And this is especially important because Dragonwilds is a survival game, and survival comes first. You can't do any damage if you're dead. I'd rather take another 10 seconds to kill something than die because I was desperate to finish the 4-hit combo. And once you combine this with parrying, you get a much better combat rhythm. Attack while you've got the opportunity, stop when the enemy is about to attack, parry when you can, dodge when you can't, and then go straight back into your own attack. You're not trying to win the fight as quickly as possible. You're trying to win the fight without dying. Tip number 5 is to learn the enemy attack patterns. This is probably one of the most important things you can actually do to improve at combat. Learn what the enemies are gonna do. Most enemies in Dragonwilds aren't completely random. They have attacks, they have animations, they have telegraphs, and once you've fought them enough times, you start recognizing what they're about to do before the attack actually happens. And that's where combat does get much easier. You start thinking, that's a normal attack, I can parry that. That's the big powered up attack, I need to dodge. He's about to do the ranged attack, I gotta get out the way, right? Instead of just, oh no, I'm getting hit and panicking. Obviously, there are differences, but the fundamentals are pretty similar, and that's another reason why I recommend actually fighting enemies rather than avoiding every fight you come across. You do want to get better at the mechanics, you do want to learn the timings, you do want to become comfortable fighting things before you actually need to fight them, especially if you're playing hard mode, because once you've learned the attacks, you can start making much better decisions about whether you should block, parry, dodge, or just get out the way. Tip number 6 is learn the enemy weaknesses. This one becomes much more important in hard mode. In normal Dragonwilds, you can probably get away with being a little bit lazy. You can take one decent weapon into a region and kill most of the things with it, but hard mode is much less forgiving. Enemies have different weaknesses and resistances. Using the wrong damage type can make fights significantly harder than they need to be. This is especially important with magic. If an enemy is weak to fire, use fire. Weak to air, use air. Water, use water, etc. Sounds very obvious, but it's easy to just stick with whatever spell you're currently using or whatever runes you have. And for melee, things are a little bit more complicated because you've got things like slash and crush, and this isn't always obvious. The game doesn't do a very good job at telling you which is which. I'll give you an example. I saw the goblin swing slash and thought, oh, well, that's obviously slash, but actually it's a crush weapon. So if you're planning on taking hard mode seriously, it's worth actually looking up the attack types and the enemy weaknesses. The wiki has the information there. Doing a little bit of research before you enter an area can save a lot of time. The zombie axe is actually one of the reasons I really like that weapon, because it gives you both slash and crush, so you have more flexibility depending on what you're fighting. And again, this isn't something that you need to absolutely obsess over in normal mode. Even if you're just playing through the game normally, you can absolutely get away with using whatever weapon you like, and I do like that about this game. But if you're farming a particular enemy or you're playing hard mode, check its weakness. Tip number 7 is use your food, infusions, and combat buffs. If you're only eating food when you're almost dead, you're missing half of the point of the cooking system. Food in Dragonwilds isn't just emergency healing anymore, it does give you perks, and those perks can have a massive impact on combat. One of my favorite examples is the combination of the monkfish skewers or the sea life perk and the pumpkin spice. The monkfish skewers give you that big emergency heal, but they also work incredibly well with the regeneration from the pumpkin spice infusions. Once you've got that combination going, you're getting so much passive healing during a fight that you don't actually need to continue to stop and eat. Obviously, this is very useful in longer encounters. Things like the fight caves become much more manageable when you're constantly regenerating health instead of having to interrupt your combat every time you take some damage. But again, don't just copy one recipe and forget about the rest of the cooking system. Check your recipe book, look at the perks, look at what the different infusions are doing. There are combat focused infusions that can help with things like stamina management and damage. You should be choosing those based on how you're actually playing. If you're struggling with stamina, use something that helps your stamina. If you're doing a long boss fight, use something that improves your sustained survivability. And if you're already comfortable staying alive, then start stacking some more offensive bonuses. The important thing is prepare for the fight before you start it. Don't wait until you're at 10% health to realize you brought absolutely nothing useful with you. Tip number 8 is actually use your special attack. If you've got a special attack available, please use it. I see this all the time in games like this. People treat special attacks like some sacred resource that has to be saved for the final boss. Don't. They are there to help you kill things. The Abyssal Whip special is particularly useful for single target combat and can help you stagger the enemy. But if you're dealing with a group, I absolutely love great sword specials. It spins around, hits multiple enemies, and does a ridiculous amount of damage. So if you've got a group of enemies coming towards you, that's exactly the kind of situation where you want to use it. The fight caves are another perfect example. You've got a lot of enemies coming at you at once. Don't necessarily want to be fighting them all one at a time. Use the special, clear the group, create some space, and keep moving. Now, there is one important caveat here. The special attack system is changing with 1.0. The classic RuneScape style attack bar is being introduced, which means specials will be more limited, but they're also going to be made more powerful. So if you're watching this after full release, some of the exact values and best uses may have changed, but the principle remains the same. Don't sit there with a fully charged special attack and never use it. Use it when it gives you an advantage or gets you out of a sticky situation. Number 9 is use your spells. This is probably one of the most underused part of Dragonwilds combat. Spells aren't just for dealing damage. Some of the best spells are the ones that make the enemy stop attacking you. Take Snare, for example. You can trap an enemy in place and it also applies poison. That is incredibly useful for crowd control, especially against things like the lesser demons in Doubt and Reach. If you've got multiple enemies coming at you, Snare can buy you time, recover your stamina, and re-engage. And then you've got Confused. I absolutely love this spell because you can turn a normal enemy against the other enemies around it. So instead of 5 enemies attacking you, suddenly one of them is attacking the other 4. That means you're not just increasing your damage, you're reducing the amount of damage you're taking. And that's the mentality I want you to take away from this video. Don't always need to maximize the amount of damage you're doing. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop the enemy from attacking you. Then there is Surge. Yes, it's useful for movement, but it can also be incredibly useful defensively. You can use it to dodge an attack, create distance, and it also leaves an image behind that can help distract enemies. That gives you the window to recover your stamina, refresh your buffs, or reapply an enchantment. And speaking of enchantments, don't forget about those either. The fire enchant and the air enchant are basically free extra damage once you've activated them. And now that you can activate some of these spells while moving, there's even less reason to ignore them. So honestly, I think a lot of people underuse the spells simply because you have to go through the spell wheel to access them. But once you start incorporating them into your combat rotation, this can make a massive difference. And finally, a tip that I didn't start using until later on in the game was to actually prepare your weapon before you fight. This is something I think a lot of people completely overlook. If you're about to find a boss or you're going on a big farming run, you can use a whetstone on your melee weapon. It gives you 15% damage multiplier and lasts for 10 minutes. 10 minutes! That's a really long time. So if you're about to go and farm dragons, or you're about to fight a boss, or you're about to spend a long time fighting through a dangerous area, why wouldn't you just take the extra damage? And if you're using magic, you've got the magical focus, which gives you the equivalent 15% damage multiplier for 10 minutes. These aren't things you need to save for some once in a lifetime occasion. They're combat buffs. You've got to use them. Same principle applies to range. Make sure you've got the ammunition you actually want to use. If you've got access to barbed arrows, use them when they're useful. Again, the goal isn't to spend half an hour preparing for every goblin you encounter. It's about recognizing when you're able to enter a big fight, taking 2 minutes beforehand to stack the odds in your favor. Because 15% extra damage over a 10-minute fight can be a huge amount of damage. Those are the top 10 combat tips that I think will make the biggest difference to the way you play RuneScape Dragonwilds. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. Stop treating combat as a DPS race. The best Dragonwilds players aren't necessarily the ones who can click the attack button the fastest. They're the ones who control the fight, manage stamina, learn when to attack, when to parry, dodge, use the right damage type, use your food, spells, specials, and don't be afraid to switch between combat styles when the situation does call for it. Because once you actually start to use all of these systems together, combat does become much easier. And that is going to be really important as we move into the harder content, especially with the raid coming up. That's going to challenge us. We're going to need all the help we can get.